worry. Very low res. All right. I'm not going to go full falsetto right now. I'm so tempted. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to our second session of Httpbis. I'm Tommy Pauly, one of your chairs. Mark Nottingham is unfortunately still not doing so well, so we're going to go on without him, but I'm sure he sends his regrets to all of you. So we met earlier in the week. This is our second half of the agenda. We're going to go over a couple of the active drafts we have on Novari Search and the incremental HTTP messages. And then we have some other topics that have been proposed, and so we're going to discuss those. Any agenda bashing here? Okie dokie. We're also going to need a note taker. Can we get a volunteer to help take notes? Thank you. Wonderful. All right. Yeah, and as usual, please just make sure to capture any decisions being made, discussion at the mic, etc. We don't need to capture everything else. Okay. Also, I will go over here. Here's the note well. If you were here earlier, you saw this before, but again, please make sure you are familiar with it. These are the terms under which we participate in the Ietf for both IPR disclosure and our code of conduct. Please make sure you're familiar with it. Okay. All right. So I think we can just jump into the agenda now, and we're going to begin with a brief update on Novari Search. And I don't believe we have slides for this. Dominic, let me know if it's otherwise, but otherwise, please go ahead.
Yeah, no slides. I was just going to present the latest draft and show how it's evolved recently. I've requested to share screen. I don't know if I'm doing so.
Yep, I'm granting it right now.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, this is Novari Search. My colleague Jeremy has presented on it a few times before. This, one of the things that was missing previously that we've fixed since the last presentation is an introduction. So, just to remind people of what it is, the idea is that when we're doing HTTP caches, we want a more flexible way of getting the cache key besides always keying on the URI. Right. So the idea is that we want to focus on the case where the query parameters can differ in certain ways that are not semantically relevant. And so, there's different things you can put in this header. It's a structured header. You can say the order of the keys doesn't matter, right? So if it's like A equals B and C equals D versus C equals D and A equals B, doesn't matter. You can say certain query parameters just don't matter at all. And then you can say actually all params except certain ones don't matter at all. And so, it goes through, it's defined as a structured header. It's kind of given a pretty detailed processing model and how you can parse the header into this URL search variant structure and then compare if two URLs are considered equivalent. It uses the application x www form URL encoding format for decoding, which has some interesting implications in terms of like Unicode and so on. And then finally, a new section that we've added since last time is complete details on how you would patch the HTTP caching specification to use this new equivalence relation. And so, it's saying you can do this. There's also this concern or idea rather raised by Mozilla about how basically if servers do really weird stuff, then to get optimal caching, the normal algorithm's inefficient. So if we can assume servers don't do weird stuff, then you can use this more efficient algorithm, which we kind of give an outline of here. Clients or caches rather can use a more efficient algorithm, which we give here. And this works out pretty well in practice. Like there's no real downside to making this assumption. If servers do weird things, then they just get fewer cache hits. And so that's what we're doing. And so, yeah, those are the big changes since last time. Yeah, the addition of the introduction and the more details on caching. There are currently no open issues for this draft. And then the other thing is that we do have some implementations, right? So we've implemented this in Chromium in a couple different caches, actually. We have both our pre-fetching and pre-rendering caches, but also our HTTP cache has recently been updated to start using this. And then we have servers, notably Google.com, but also a number of other websites, which we've collected through our open telemetry, are deploying this to get the benefits, mostly, again, for the preloading, although Google.com is excited to get it for the HTTP caching as well. So, this is my first IETF draft and introduction to the process, but from my understanding, this means the draft's in a pretty good state, interoperable implementations, no open issues. So I've been advised that it's time to ask for last call. So happy to do any discussion, but I think that's where we're at.
All right, thank you, Dominic. Does anyone have any comments, questions on the draft? Any of the points raised or on the topic of if we think this is ready for a last call? Lucas, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's mostly a mic check more than anything for later on. But we just Dominic's last point there, multiple implementations. Sorry, I might have missed it when I was listening. It sounded like lots of Google implementations. Were there anyone else other than the proponents?
For sure. We have a number of client implementations, right? We have I can try and pull up that website. We have like a Chrome status use counter that shows all the websites that are sending the header. I don't know of more than one server or cache implementation at this point.
Okay, cool. Just thanks for the clarification. I haven't got any strong comments. I'm just, as usual, the more experience we can get with this, even if there's no issues right now, maybe we'll find something if we waited a little bit longer. But.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, like we do have multiple, albeit Google cache implementations. So we did find some interesting. That was actually part of the more efficient approach. So we found like the in-memory version for the pre-render cache was able to do an ON scanning. But then we're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to do the disk cache. That needs to be really fast. So let's do this extra thing where we assume servers don't send weird values.
There's a clarifying question on the multiple implementations. Can you reiterate which were the non-Google ones? And I thought I heard you say multiple clients, but my understanding, like there aren't multiple browser clients supporting this yet, correct?
Yeah, sorry, I might be getting my terminology confused. There are multiple websites sending the header.
Got it. Okay.
I can pull up that list and add it to the notes in just a bit.
Very good, thank you. Okay. I guess soliciting feedback there from any other cache deployments or browser implementations. Do we have anyone in the in Midako now or in the room now who is looking at doing an implementation here, who we can expect to get feedback from? Martin Thompson.
So I was expecting Lars to answer this one. He knows better than I do. We are looking at an implementation of this one. I don't know where that's at.
Okay.
I'd have to go and look.
Okay. But this is something that you're looking at, so like we
Generally
could reasonably get
generally
input.
positive on the idea.
Yeah.
This is something that would make caching performance better.
Yeah.
You'll note the feedback that Dominic was talking about came from one of the
Correct.
folks who works on a cache. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if that is something that is coming relatively soon, like before the next IETF, think no. Okay, shaking head. Okay. I guess just from your perspective, would you guys be fine supporting a last call before you do your implementation, or is this something where people would prefer to get implementation experience before we ship it?
So I'm reasonably happy that Dominic's content from what experience Google has with it, and that's very useful. But because there are not two client cache implementations, browser caches are weird and not very good, but they do tend to throw up a whole bunch of different sort of performance and compatibility constraints. So while we've found sort of one fairly obvious issue with the algorithm, I wouldn't be confident until we're a little further into it. I'll try to find out exactly what time frame we're talking about. But my suggestion would be we can working group last call this one and just park it for a short period of time. I don't think that would affect the deployments that are out there. They can happily go ahead and use it. Yes. It would potentially reduce the sort of incentive for some people to start sending it because of the risk that it might change. But I mean, at this point, I would say the chances of it changing seem pretty minimal. I mean, it's pretty obviously okay from my perspective.
Very good, thank you. All right. I also did have a quick question to Dominic and also I guess to the group. As you were mentioning some of the new changes and specifically regarding RFC 9111 around caching, and specifically like how it's like updating that behavior there if you support this spec. I'm wondering if we should formally mark this as updating that RFC, such that if people are reading the RFC on caching, they should have that annotated and come look at this so that they're doing that as part of their implementation work. So I guess, Dominic, if you have opinions or if anyone else has opinions on that, that'd be great to hear.
I don't have strong opinions. This feels like an area of the IETF that I'm not as familiar with on like how you do cross-references on optional specifications and things like that. So happy to take your guidance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can file an issue for that and we can have a discussion on GitHub, and we'll also discuss more with Mark when he is back. Okay. Anything else on this one, or shall we move on? Okay, very good. Thank you, Dominic.
All right, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Take care. Okay. And next up, we are going to be talking about incremental messages with Kazuho. And let me share slides. Yeah, let me just make the clicker work.
Thank you.
Okay. Should be.
Thank you. Let me hold my mic and look at this screen. So today I'm going to talk about incremental HTTP messages. So this draft was presented in last IETF and has been adopted. I haven't published a working group version. Sorry for the delay, but we do have issues, so I want to go through them. But to recap, the problem is that intermediaries are allowed to buffer, even though typically, well, or sometimes they do deliver incrementally. And some applications tend to require such delivery method of incremental, but because the proxies could buffer, and if they buffer, it becomes an issue because then there's the deadlock. So the proposal in the individual draft, which has been adopted, is that we'd have a incremental header having only one value, which is the structured headers true, meaning that the HTTP message that has this header is to be forwarded incrementally. So if this header exists, intermediaries are required to forward incrementally, or when they decide not to, they should reject the request by sending 503 or probably by resetting the stream. And it's important to remember that this header is per HTTP message. So if a client adds this header to the HTTP request, it makes the HTTP request being incremental, but not the response. So to make the response being incremental, the server has to set this header to the HTTP response that the server sends. And the other thing that's worth noting is that the header field is advisory, because this is an extension to HTTP, and we cannot retrofit all the existing HTTP servers to implement this thing. There it goes. So we have basically 4 issues, but the first 3 is about the signaling. So let me go through all of them at once. First one, this is about having more modes rather than having no header versus having this incremental header. So the status quo is as explained. It's either no header, meaning the default behavior, or the incremental header, meaning either do it incrementally or signal an error. Whereas with the tri-state proposal, we have 2 other modes, which is incremental preferred and incremental not preferred. So it's rather than do it incrementally or signaling an error, but it's about indicating the preference of if the message should be sent in an incremental manner or should be forwarded. And the next issue is about clients indicating how the responses should be sent. As said previously, the current draft says that the header applies to each HTTP message. But sometimes the clients want to suggest how the response should be delivered. So this header is being proposed for the purpose. And probably we could use prefer call incremental, or depending on what we decide, we could use expect call incremental, for example. So this is kind of simple for when we have only one mode, but if we are to have 3 modes, like prefer incremental or prefer buffered or something, then we have to change this header field to a dedicated header and have those modes also being expressed. And the next issue is if we want to have intermediaries signaling if they can send responses to the client using the incremental method. And the rationale is that we might want to avoid unnecessary work at the server when we know that the intermediary cannot forward the response incrementally. And the other rationale is that by receiving those signals at the server side, then the server operator can have more understanding of what's going on, and it helps. And so the strawman for this proposal would look like either having a response dash capabilities header field with a single value, or like a can respond incremental header field having a Boolean. And as you'd expect, if we are to have more states, more modes, then it has to be a way of expressing all the options that the intermediaries can implement. And in case of this example, the intermediary say that it can either do always and preferred, and which means that it cannot do not preferred mode. So the question is like, do we need this tri-state thing rather than having the only hard fail mode which goes to the reject? And the other question is like, do we need to have all these signaling mechanisms, or do we need any? So I'd like to hear what you think.
All right. Any feedback or questions? We have some design choices to make.
So if there's, there it is. Oh, okay, so if there's something, if nobody feels strongly, I think we should just focus on the initial goal because it's simple and it does what we need. But that's my preference.
Yeah, I share Kazuo's preference here. I think that, there's a lot of potential complexity here. 3 states, the ability to, for an intermediary on the request path to signal to a server about its response capabilities, the ability for a client to indicate how an intermediary might want to respond on the response path, all of that sort of thing. But the simple thing is pretty straightforward. I think the only thing that I would do in that case is if the request has incremental, the intermediary should flip its default. If its default mode is to buffer and it's doing incremental forwarding of a request, it should probably flip the default to incremental forwarding for any response. And I think that's probably the only thing that we could do in terms of a recommendation. Now that would be a recommendation only if the server can still indicate what its preferences are, and that's sufficient.
So regarding the signaling mechanism, do you have preferences?
No other signaling mechanisms than that,
I see.
essentially.
Thank you.
Piotr Sikora. I think, yeah, this has enough edge cases that we probably should just focus on the initial case, which is, hard requirement, and the preferences I would probably, remove from the spec, because if we add the signal, then clients are basically micromanaging, buffering behavior of intermediaries, which is probably not, their business. So either they have hard requirement and absolutely need incremental delivery, or they shouldn't care. And separately, I think someone also mentioned this in issues for OHTTP. I think we may need a state where incremental is disabled completely. So also, false statement where you require full buffering at the intermediaries.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I had jumped in queue next. So speaking as an individual and also as co-author on this, I agree that keeping it simple is good. I think some of these more complex syntax variants and tri-states are adding complexity for which we don't specifically have a use case. I do, I guess, question a bit the framing of hard failing or hard requirement. That doesn't seem to be totally reflected right now in what I see in the text. Like, kind of as it must, the text currently says that the clients and servers cannot expect all intermediaries to understand this, and so even if you say, incremental is 1, you may not get incremental, but you still may get the response back. So everyone's going to have to deal with it. Their wishes not being respected. So I guess I'm not sure what the distinction between a hard fail and not is. It's more just an expression of preference anyway. And then also to Peter's point, I think it seems fine to define the 0 Boolean preference if we wanted to just say like, as far as I know, this has no value in being delivered incrementally. Go ahead and buffer. But I think that would be as far as the change we'd want to take.
Right. So thank you for the comments. I think the hard fail thing is important for certain applications. I mean, and like, it's true that you sometimes don't know what the intermediary is, but there's often the cases where you know who the intermediary is. And in that case, we can require, and in that case where we know that who the intermediary is, and if we know that the intermediary implements this, then it's much better to use masks to respect the value or fail, because then we can have in those deployments very expected behavior, either succeeding or failing without going to timeouts. So I think there's value in requiring specific behaviors for the servers that actually implement this.
I get that. I think that makes sense. So I think specifying that a intermediary may reject a request on the basis that it says, no, this won't be incremental. I think that makes a lot of sense. But we just need to be, clear that the reality of it is, despite everyone's best intentions, things that may desire to be delivered incrementally may end up getting buffered just by timing and transport aspects, and things that are not intended to be delivered incrementally may just get spread out because of, again, transport level things.
Right, I totally agree with that. So regardless of if we go to use our word strong as mask or mask not, we have to point out that it's not always going to work. And I think that goes to your next point about having the buffered mode. And I'm kind of not sure if the people asking for buffer mode actually wants that hard fail mode or just the preference. And if it's going to be just the preference, the question is if we need such a flag because it's going to be a micromanagement.
Fair. Although we could decide to say that marking it as 0 is the same as not putting anything. But we may as well not,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
So a number of things. I think you've basically reached the same conclusions that I have, which is good. Another one is all of these other signaling mechanisms. If we find out that we need them later, we can add them back. It's not like it's completely impossible. Even the Boolean flag has the ability to have parameters attached to it, I think, which would be scary, and I wouldn't necessarily advocate for it, but we have that possibility because we have structured fields and we can rely on the fact that the people are using structured field implementations to pass these things. We should be assuming that, I think. So that sort of covers off some of that. To Charles' point about the oblivious HTTP and the relay knows it's a relay and it can buffer when it's not doing the incremental thing, and it can do the incremental thing when it's clearly needs to be incremental. So I think that particular use case is not especially compelling. I think Kuzoa's point about if you understand the application that's traversing the intermediary, then you can be required to do some things or not required to do other things, and you can have much stronger guarantees around musts and whatever else. But otherwise, what we have seems to work for most of those cases. And yeah, if it doesn't understand, it's not going to do anything, is it? Not going to change its behavior. It's just going to go straight on through.
Peter.
Going back to fully buffered mode, just to clarify, when I mean 0 or false, I meant that incremental should be forbidden, not that it would be preference. So it would be again hard requirement. And to the point about oblivious HTTP, yes, right now this solution is this case is solved, but the point of bringing incremental header to this working group was to make generic solution for other use cases as well. Yeah.
Right. So should we go to the next one? Yep. Right. So next one is, I think, easy. And so I think we want to be clear about what incremental means when it's going to be incremental. And the question is specifically about how long or how much data intermediaries are allowed to buffer when they are claiming to be respecting what incremental means. And the proposal here is that for time bound, you can buffer it for a small amount of time. We won't specify the numbers, but in a timely manner. And regarding byte bound, we would say that intermediaries would be required to forward every byte. You cannot just buffer 1 byte because you think 1 byte is small. So essentially, this means that we want to have the same semantics as connect tunnel, for example, but the signal being unidirectional in each direction.
Another way of thinking of this is these are a minimum, not a maximum. So you don't buffer to a given time and a given byte limit. That would be silly. You buffer for up to a certain time or a certain number of bytes, and then it goes. And if either limit is reached, then you move on. And I think that solves that problem in a different way, but almost identically. And your point about sometimes you'll only have a single byte buffered, pass it on. That's a useful thing to say.
To paraphrase, it's Nagel. But
Yes, exactly. It's Nick.
right. So I think that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Alrighty. Now I need to take back control from the slide clicker. Okay, so next up we should have Lucas with unencoded digests.
Hello.
Hello. Do you wanna share from your end?
I will try. Yes.
All right. You have been granted the power.
Like He-Man. Okay, folks. I think we've got 15 minutes for this. There's a few slides, but hopefully I can just go through them quickly. This thing is called unencoded digest. Naming's really hard. It was formerly called identity digest. Before that, I'm going to walk through the history, but we did already have this thing, and it was kind of done in a weird way via an ID prefix. That doesn't make any sense if people can't remember that far back, but I'll try and refresh our memory. So, it's post-lunch. I thought you might like a digestive for the people in the room. So we have RFC 9530, the digest headers. We've got these two things, content digest and wrapper digest. It didn't always start that way. What we did is have the initial 00 draft that was just trying to update RFC 3230, which was a digest header using very old HTTP terminology and stuff. So it's kind of just an update draft to bring things into line with the world. But we also kind of slid in two other things, a new feature, which was two new special digest algorithm identifiers to cover the case of wanting to express a digest of the representation data of the resource when no content coding was applied. Again, don't get too hung up on the terminology there, representation data or whatever. That's how it was in the 00, and we changed things and we got consensus and we published 9530 after we removed those two things. So kind of in a roundabout way, the working group already adopted this work once before. In 2019, we just decided along the way to take it back out. And there is an issue on this. If we want to go back through, I'll kind of touch on that maybe later on. But before we go into too much more of the history, I just wanted to walk people through an example of what this identity digest thing is. So just imagine a simple 1.1 request for a boring string, and you've got optional, well, you have content negotiation here. So the server could potentially return non-encoded version of this thing or gzip encoded version of this thing. The client's indicated support for gzip, so the response comes back and the content encoding is gzip in this case. Along with that are two headers. One is the wrapper digest, the representation digest of the representation that was selected here, the gzip version. And with this spec, you could also send back an unencoded digest, which would be the hash of the unencoded representation. So the boring string that we had, but without the additional gzip encoding. So that's where these two values would differ, because it's the same thing. It's just whether you did the maths on the version that was gzip or the version that was not represented as content. That's because I'm too lazy. So, pointing out specifically the representation digest is the response message as gzip. The digest is not gzip, but the unencoded. You can simplify this down. No, Martin, it's not hash of content. This is in the spec. It's, I think, I can't even talk. It has a value. I probably even calculated it wrong in the spec, and I'll make sure all the examples are correct. But yeah, you can keep simplifying this thing down. Digest of representation, digest of unencoded representation. And the reason you might want to do this is because when you receive this content, whatever it is, depending on the context of usage, this was the primary motivator for in the first instance, is that, say, your web browser hasn't implemented digest validation yet. So you care because you've made this as a fetch request, and it's going to deliver something that you need to feed into your app, like a frame of video or something that can blow up the web codec decoder or something. You want to be able to do a quick validation. You decided that's what you want to do, but due to the magic of content encoding, something's already taken that off at a layer below you. So you don't want to have to kind of re-gzip an object in order to calculate a hash of it to validate that it's the thing that you or the peer claimed it would be. So because we're talking about representations rather than the actual content that was in the message, there's a subtle difference here. And this is what kind of caught people out, maybe in RFC 9530, which is why we ended up with having both content digest and repr digest. And adding yet another thing is maybe not clear to everyone who isn't super familiar with these semantics. But when you are, it's very important, like, to be able to have these differences of things. So the only change really here is that the client made a head request, so it's not going to get any message content, but that the server could still return both the representation digest of the object it would have returned had the request been get, like previously, and it can also return the unencoded digest. Right. So I talked about this ID prefix thing. This was the issue 885 for the old spec. It was open very early. Always immediately, as soon as we adopted the document, James Manager said, like, oh, this is a pretty cool thing. Like, you've defined two algorithms with this ID thing, and they do the similar stuff. Maybe we could make this a generic prefix, and we could go and do all of this stuff. And there's a long chain. It's one of the longest issues we had about different ideas, different opinions on that. But in 2021, we decided to just take it out and punt. One of the concerns is always you add a prefix or a suffix for a thing, and you end up in IANA, purgatory and misery. So yeah, in the end, it was also the right decision to make because of how we ended up making the logical split between content digest and wrapper digest. Having another header for the unencoded thing aligns a lot better with our design, as hopefully I illustrated in the previous examples. Anticipating the publication of RFC 9530, just while I had some of the context still in my head, I decided to kind of write this up as this is how you could do it back in 2023. There was some short mailing list discussion, mainly Roy telling me he hated the name of what we called Identity Digest at the time, but some other bits and pieces too. There wasn't really any active interest, not even from myself, or use cases that I knew about. But it's out there, and let things bloom if people find interest. So roll forward to 2024. A chap called Mike West, who we might be familiar with from other HTTP work, in the Ietf, but is also doing a lot of work in the W3C and the web app space. It's been working on a thing called signature-based SRI. I'm not going to try and explain this to this room because I'll butcher it. But effectively, there's an explainer on the GitHub resources there, and lots of other things that are useful if you're interested in this kind of thing. But the TLDR is it would be nice if, sorry, let's stop. If you're familiar with sub-resource integrity, which is a way for things on the web to kind of include a hash of a resource that they're dependent on. So you want to say, pull in this piece of JavaScript from this other thing, this other website, this third party content CDN or something. And you trust me, but this other thing, maybe you don't. Maybe it could get hacked, and that JavaScript could be insecure. I don't know, but here's the hash of the thing I need to run and execute for this page for this thing to work. And then the browser implements this SRI thing and would not execute that JavaScript if it didn't meet the expectations set out by the claim, which is cool, but it has some brittleness and some friction, and that any time a script might change, like you need to go and recompute the hashes, and you need to go and update the other hundreds of web pages that might reference this thing. So the proposal that Mike has made, and others are working on this too, is that it would be nicer if you could just have an ability to kind of have a provenance of the object and trust the thing that would serve the object rather than the object itself. And there's a lot of interesting technical details of all of this thing. But the really cool thing is that when I saw this kind of work getting started and some of the technical requirements that they had around integrity and signatures, it just struck me that we'd already built kind of what they needed to do, and they didn't need to reinvent the wheel. So the work of this working group, signatures and digests, kind of they have it all except for this digest of an unencoded thing, which we've done some work, and we kind of already adopted the thing. We just didn't work at it any further because no one wanted it at the time. So that's why Mike's come on board on the draft, and we've kind of done a little bit of iteration on it to adapt to the needs of the signed integrity work that he's working on. And this is an example of a response. It still uses the old identity digest name there because naming's hard. I'm not going to go through to it, but yeah, go and have a look if you really like this kind of thing. So ignore the name. We adopted this thing, we punted on it. We actually have a use case as implementation intent. Again, I don't want to speak for people who aren't in this room, but there's implementation going on in Chrome, as far as I understand, experiments that are happening right now. Maybe other indications of interest or intent from other client-side kind of browsers as well. So my question to the group is, can we just adopt this, brush up the minor details, and finally publish it? I'd say, unlike the previous digest work, where there was a lot of semantics from the very old thing to tidy up and work through and make sure, and it took a while, a bit longer than we anticipated, but we ended up with the right design. I think this would be pretty quick to just get done. So I don't think it would take much time or effort. Obviously, more people, more eyeballs looking at it, great. Yeah, that's it.
All righty, thank you, Lucas. Any questions, comments, feedback from the group on this one? Lisa?
Just minor, if you don't like the name of it, are you going to change the title?
What? Sorry, the title. I'm open to anything. If people have good suggestions and they like them, I'll take it.
I understand it's hard to change the draft name, but if you gave the disclaimer that don't be confused by the draft name, but the title you can change, and that will carry through to the RFC.
Yeah, we could always change it when we adopt
change the
it
draft name.
if we do. Yeah. Always fine.
The one thing I would say, and the reason we've changed it from from what was identity to unencoded, is because people are building implementations right now. What we didn't want to do is let too many people go and build version 0 and then immediately go and change it, because we knew the old identity digest was a name that everyone hated. That doesn't mean that they couldn't change it again. That would be fine. But obviously, it would be really nice to avoid the churn here, and maybe we can live with the name until some period of time and schedule a change in months or something.
Justin.
Justin Richer. So I will be the first to say that I just barely and probably incompletely understand the difference between content digest and wrapper digest, apart from Lucas trying his darndest to help me understand it.
You beat me.
Yeah, you're shaking your head too. I'm very mildly worried that a third digest header is just going to add more confusion. But the thing is, if there are specific use cases where it does make sense and we can carve those out, I think that it absolutely makes sense. And this can be fairly quick because it's, you know, building on stuff that's already out there. It's not really sort of defining something new. It's saying, take this thing and apply it to a specific thing. So yeah, I think it makes sense. And I just had one more question. If you could go back one slide. Lucas, I was just wondering which one of those is you and which one of those is me in this photo? Am I the Hannibal in this, or I'm not sure. I'm not the Hannibal, I was just told.
I don't mind. I mean, what I would say is this is only part of the team. You know, we have Roberto, who is a big contributor too. Maybe Mike Smith on the site. Like there are other people that help make the plan come together, and I'm looking for some voices of support here to kind of do that.
I didn't expect an absolutely perfect answer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We're at time. If there's any other feedback, you can jump up now. Otherwise, we can discuss this more on the list. Okay. Thank you very much. And next up, I think we have Yoav talking about delete cookie and HTTP only prefix. Yoav, go ahead. Do you have any consent, or were we just talking?
I'll just share the draft.
Great, let's do
possible. Okay, so hey folks, at the last meeting we talked about delete cookie. Now it actually has a draft with a processing model. The general semantics didn't materially change since the last time we talked. Essentially, this will enable servers to delete cookies that they can receive without having to know the details with which those cookies were set. So without having to know the path, without having to know the domain of the cookie. And as a discussion on the issue is that similarly, servers will not have to know the partition parameters for partitioned cookies. And once we'll have fetch integration, we can get the processing model to just work and do the right thing and enable the server to only be able to delete the cookie if it was supposed to get that same cookie. So yeah, I got a bunch of feedback on the processing. Okay. Yeah. Essentially, I would love for this group to adopt this and potentially, ideally, fold this into one of the larger cookie documents. I know that there are multiple things in flight on that front. I have no opinions on how that, how that would go, but it's, I'd love adoption. Very similarly, there is the HTTP only cookie prefix draft, which is, did I stop sharing? I stopped sharing.
I can grant it again.
Yeah. So yeah, similarly, there is the HTTP only cookie prefix draft. It is similarly a very simple draft, even with a simpler processing model. And essentially it enforces a bunch of restrictions on cookies that start out with either HTTP only prefix or host HTTP only prefix. That's more or less it. And I would love to also, given that responses on the mailing list were relatively supportive, I would love to get adoption if y'all think it makes sense. And similarly, I would love for this to be folded into a larger doc for whatever larger doc y'all think is appropriate. And yeah, that's more or less what I had, and I'd love to hear questions and opinions.
All right, thank you. Just one comment for process and targeting. We have draft Ietf Httpbis RFC 6265 bis. That one we are not going to reopen, I believe, unless we hear extremely strong indications to do so. This has already gone through the working group and gone through the ISG, so that's on the publication track. We've worked on that for a long time. So we do have another effort that is going on to revise that yet again. I think that's going to be the next talk after this. So I would personally interpret the question you had of like, does that effort want to take these into it? We haven't done any adoption calls on that, which means that if the authors and the group participants collectively think those should get folded together, that could essentially be part of one adoption effort. I think anything we're doing to adopt these or that other kind of larger rewrite is going to have to be very clear around scope, and when we're doing the consensus call to adopt, be clear, what is going to be continuing over from the ongoing work, and what is going to be newly in scope, and what do we think we would need further consensus calls in the future to bring into scope.
Makes sense.
Well, that's all process stuff. What do people think? Any comments from the room or from me to go? Johan.
Hey, yeah, no, I'm giving the talk next about the new cookie spec that we're drafting up. I personally like, I think, both proposals. I can see them being in the new cookie draft. I think it's important for them to integrate with the new cookies draft because, they touch some components like partition cookies, third-party cookie blocking, which we have not yet really defined anywhere else, right? That's why we're doing it, just to take some stuff away. That's why we're doing this work. And so I think that's, yeah, I can see that personally. Just wanted to sort of voice that support.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you for chiming in like that. That's great. Any other comments, questions? Martin, come on up.
Yeah, just wanted to add support to this one. I think this is good work. I think it would be better if you could delete the header field, not just individual cookies. I know you don't work for Google anymore, so maybe Johan can do that for us and remove cookies from from that browser, and we'll do the same on our end.
Yeah, that's the next one after that.
Cool. That sounds good. Okay, if there's nothing else, we can move on. But yeah, thank you, y'all, for introducing this and giving us a fantastic segue into the next conversation.
Thank you.
In progress here.
Hello. I'll just take it. My name's Johan. I work for Google, Google Chrome. I am writing a new cookie spec along with a bunch of other very nice folks, such as Anne van Kesteren is the official co-author on the draft. He works for Apple, and then we got support from Ben Vandersloot from Mozilla, who's right now doing a bunch of WhatWG work for us, or PRs there. I wanted to chat about this proposal, which I already presented on before, so I don't have any slides today. I'm happy to just pull up the draft itself, just to have something on screen. How does that work here? Okay.
Yep, you're asking. Sorry, give me a second. Meet Echo is just being a little slow for me.
All good.
You should be granted.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we would like to get adoption by this group. We've proposed this before. I think the feedback overall has been positive. Like, we haven't heard anything negative. I think the only thing that we've been stuck on a little bit was just waiting for 60-65bis to get into IESG review, and then I think what we want to do is then apply all the edits that were made from that review onto our document, which obviously retains a lot of the original changes from original text from 60-65bis, so that the diff.
Zoom in a bit.
Go ahead.
Zoom in. That's really tiny.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that's great feedback.
If we'd like to look at it, then we should zoom in. Otherwise, it can be a nice little backdrop.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, show you all the text here. It is very similar to the old cookie spec. It is a little more algorithm based, like procedural. I think we defined a couple of things a little bit more precisely, like browser specs do. And I think that's the overall impression you might get from reading this. Some of the really the changes that we're actually making that are like new stuff you can see are also in HTML and Fetch. For example, this PR here in Fetch that again Ben Vandersloot is currently submitting, where we really deeply integrate Fetch with the new cookie spec. Why are we doing this? Well, so 60-65bis had a couple of really cool new concepts, such as same-site cookies. Those already had some wonky integrations with browser specs, right? Like they called into concepts like document, etc. that they didn't really or shouldn't really know about from a layering perspective. And in the meantime, we have a bunch of new APIs, either already having been shipped by browsers or are being in development, such as the cookie store API, partition cookies, third-party cookie blocking, storage access, FedCM, and all these that all integrate with cookies very deeply. And so to be able to do that, we feel like we need a bit new architecture to the cookie spec. I think we're generally happy to take on new changes, such as Yoav's proposal. And I think there's also a bit of an outstanding question for us that we'd love to consult on with this group as to what do we do from a server perspective, right? Like, we really care about clients, we're browser developers, but we definitely recognize that this spec is also used by server or cookie producers. And so I think there was one PR already made by Rory. Let me share that instead, which we haven't merged yet, because I think there's a little bit of that question up in the air, like what's our plan? How do we deal with the existing server sections. Do we want to change them, and in what direction do we want to take them? This one particularly adds advice on how does a server correctly delete a cookie, which also happens to be the intersect with the proposal from Yoav, but this sort of like documents the current state. So yeah, if anyone has strong opinions about that, I think we're happy to talk and just collaborate going forward. But yeah, so just to say that. And as to recent progress on the spec itself, I think there hasn't been a lot in a while, but we've now kicked off new work. Particularly the first kind of big piece that we're tackling is integrating with the cookie store API that is shipped in Chrome. It's also being shipped, I think, in other browsers now, or being implemented in other browsers now. And the cookie store API has this concept of cookie change events, which was really not specified at all anywhere so far, and obviously it very deeply integrates with cookies, and so we have to define this sort of way of knowing when cookies get deleted, when they expire, based on like setting a cookie or reading a cookie, and transmitting that back to the browser so that it can emit these cookie change events, and that's sort of something that Dylan from my team, was also the author of the petition cookies, the chips petition cookie spec, is currently working on. And I think that's all I had for updates. And yeah, I think we hope to start a call for adoption very soon as we have the remaining edits from 6265bis ported over to our spec.
All right. Thank you. Any questions, comments on this? Yoav, go ahead.
So yeah, I agree. This looks like the right place for my proposals to go into. How do you see that happen? Like, simply, should I just file PRs against your draft?
Yeah, I think we had. Yeah, I think in the past we had this informal conversation once, right? I think I told you you can do that, but I'm not sure how. Like, it's not adopted yet officially, right? So I'm not sure how that. Yeah, I think if you do that, I think we can probably just go review them, discuss them. I will say you need a few bits in order to properly specify your specific proposal that are being developed in Fetch right now, right? Specifically the partition key, the bit about unpartitioned cookie access or not. And so those we might want to wait on to get merged. I hope that happens within the next couple of weeks, something like that. So it shouldn't be long, but I would expect, Anna's not here, I'm not trying to speak for him, but I would expect, for example, Anna to be to want to have that happen first before we merge your changes into our spec.
That makes sense. Thanks.
So I'm not the chairs, but what we've done in the past for cookie in particular, because we need to be a little bit more careful, is to run an adoption call on an individual draft, get happy with the draft, and then once the draft is adopted, basically let that draft die and merge all the contents into the cookie spec. And I think that sounds like a good plan here. I would advocate for the chairs doing that adoption call relatively soon.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that also makes sense. I'll, of course, chat with Mark when we're able to chat.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And yeah, it's unfortunately, Yoav, I guess, probably a good idea to wait. But yeah, I'm not sure that has any real world, like huge real world effects. It's hopefully just going to be a couple of weeks or months from now. So I think in terms of implementation and all that, that hopefully shouldn't block things too much.
Right. And I think having PRs ready to go and text, like available for people to talk about and think about in this is great. And then it's really a matter of, pressing which buttons to merge and decide what's officially in.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I think here the action item is for Mark and I as chairs to go kick things off.
Cool.
Take that in the notes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you also. I think we're going to move on. And finally, if we have Victor talking about some client hints. All right, I'll get here. I'm just getting the clicker ready to go. I updated since. Yeah. And actually, I think for the camera purposes, it is best to be here. Sorry, Casino. No one saw your face.
Hello. My name is Victor from Google. It's Friday, I think. I'm trying to finish in the next 10 minutes, and then everyone can go home, I think. So today I'm going to discuss about HTTP client reliability. So, and before I'm discussing the problem, so let's first I'm trying to recap. So what is HTTP clients? So actually, it's a standardized draft. Actually, is a provide a proactive continuous integration, I think, mechanism to all the server to specify what they're actually interested in for the client's characteristics. So basically, those are the HTTP request headers that containing the client's like device, network, and user preference information, etc. So the main goal, I think, design the client hints is trying to limit the entropy that is sending over to the server. This also migrate some like privacy concern. So we're just shifting from the passive fingerprinting to active requests. So we usually not allow that server can identify individual easily, I think. So we're also, in the meantime, we're trying to address some like relevant use cases and with purpose built the API. And so why we're trying to use client hints? So it's actually a framework to organize the information better. So it doesn't like how the old-fashioned trying to put everything in single headers, or for example, how the user agent does actually. And it also minimizes the passive fingerprinting. So as I mentioned earlier, so server may usually request only the what actually needs. Most sites actually should do that, but we cannot just like enforce. But I will talk about later for this case, I think. And instead of broadcasting every information to everyone, I think server usually can request only care about the which you need. And we also divide the major two groups, I think. One is the low entropy, and another with the high entropy. For the low entropy, I think it's just safe to send it as default. And for the high entropy, I think just like it's only sent when the server requests. This effort trying to reduce the default entropy as sending over to the server, I think. So I will explore more details about why this can be works and how it can be designed like this way, I think. So it's also easy to measure and total information that is sending over to the server. So I think for this, I think just like is based on like it enable us to audience such information, such use cases and how it's gonna be used. And it's also have how to building maybe privacy focused approaches. And so why do we just like need a low entropy or high entropies? And so for the low entropy, it's just like sending at the defaults, for example, just like how the platform or how whether it's a mobile or something like that. So for the first one, I think it's just we just followed best practice for fingerprinting. So I think the rule number one is that like we should avoid unnecessary or server increase for the linking to the service, I think. And another would be the browser can implement some controlling to the entropy, or for example, they can just like implement policy or APIs to restrict what information they want to share to the and it's with the for the long term, I think with limited entropy, I think it's just building a transparent report, and then this just help us building the permission-based models, I think. So I think even though I think clients may not eliminate the fingerprinting entirely, I think it just like provide a framework for better privacies and protections. And for now, we don't have enforce any rule that so maybe sites cannot maybe request all the clients, but if they want to sharing maybe some, but permission policy applies when they trying to sharing some clients to the third parties. So also some mechanism related to the entry limit can implement to prevent the abuse of such usage, I think. So here came the problem, I think. Sort of for the initial request, I think the server, the client doesn't know the server's preference. They don't know what to send for the server. So also the server cannot optimize the content delivery on the first visit. So one easy option that maybe people always argue that why just sending all the clients at default, just like doing this. So as I mentioned earlier, this can be raised some privacy concern, also violate some best practice for fingerprinting, I think. So it's also controversial with the, I think, security suggestions as the initial like some clients document reason, I think. So to address issue, I think two mechanism provided. One is the critical stage. It's just like a HTTP header, and the server can specify what they actually need in the first request. And then once the client doesn't send the request in the first, they need to restart the request and then add corresponding clients. So, but this often can cause some so-called performance regression because it's a refresh restarts, but it's straightforward to implement, I think. And another one is the accepted briefing. So just like if we have enough use cases, I think we also can bring back maybe the extension settings, maybe drafted years ago, I think, by someone from Microsoft. So this mechanism actually to optimize the delivery of the clients. So servers should send them as early as possible. So for connection that is using TLCL, one option would be trying to take advantage of the IPS draft. Actually, it's already expired, I think, is drafted by another Victor and David Benjamin. So it trying to guarantee that servers like preference will be available to the clients that after the initial handshake. And for the accept frame draft, I think is a connection level optimized mechanism. So it's not a frame based. It has whole, it's all like limits. And especially for some like intermediate cases, I will not explore too much details for the Alpine stuff and relate to accept frame, but it's maybe needed another half an hour to discuss the details if we have enough interest. And for if we have enough data, we needed to bring back the Alpine and accept it with the TLS group together to address relate to the issue, I think. So I think here came to my question. First question would be, does the working group think whether this problem should resolve? So if the answer is no, I think I can stop here. And then my following up question is that, so Google already have implementation with the Alpine and the access frame. So any party interesting to expand the solution to their infrastructures. So when think a step further, is any enough interesting to adopt this like draft and then resume further discussion to address related to like scope or design, maybe to improve better. I think that's my talk, I think. I'm glad to hear opinions and discussion about this. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We have people in queue. Tommy.
Tommy Jensen. I think these drafts are interesting. I think they're far more interesting with the TLS draft in place because my biggest interest is having the correct client hints when the client's willing to send them on the very first request. I think having the critical makes sense, and it's a good way to differentiate what is nice to have versus what have to have. But I would really want to see the TLS draft adopted also.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Martin?
Martin Thompson. I think there's a high level question here that has never really been answered satisfactorily in this group. And it's probably not necessarily one that the HTTP working group needs to be answering, but it's one that needs to be answered somewhere. And that is about the nature of adaptive content and who's responsible for ensuring that adaptive content is made available and what the trade-offs are. One of the things that client hints sort of implicitly assumes is that you start an interaction with a server and the server is responsible for adapting that very first piece of content to some aspects of the client. And in particular, privacy-sensitive aspects of the client, right? And I don't accept that premise. I think that there's a number of cases in which this is interesting, but most of them basically boil down to delivering ads more quickly. If you think about the way that the web is structured, a lot of the interactions start with a request for a web page. And that request is often completely not adapted on the server side. The content itself contains all the necessary adaptations to deal with the fact that Safari doesn't have this feature and Chrome has this feature and whatever else, right? And so you make a non-adaptive request and that content is then able to deal with that. Now, it's obviously not true and certainly not efficient in a lot of cases when you're, say, pulling down a very large image. Knowing the device pixel ratio gives you the ability to make a good call about what image to take. But that's what the picture element does. And client hints don't necessarily help in that scenario if you accept that the picture element is the preferred thing to do. And the nice thing about the picture element is you can request the high DPR image even though you don't have a high DPR screen, or you can reduce vice versa. And the privacy properties are superior than just giving the server your device pixel ratio. I think it's potentially a poor example to give from a privacy perspective because DPR is very highly correlated with a lot of other things that the server can obviously observe. So all this effort to try to accelerate the client hints thing continues, for me at least, to be a big question about, well, do we even think that client hints are a good idea? And obviously some people have already accepted that fact, but I haven't yet.
Thanks.
All right, Lucas, please go ahead.
Hello. So at a very high level, I don't know if I have an opinion about the client hints thing at all. But living in a world where it does already exist to some extent, and that some people are doing this stuff, I can believe the use case where on the very first visit ever to a website, that is an area that people do care about on the performance angle, serving the right content in the fastest amount of time. Some of these issues go away if you're a repeat visitor, especially if it's, say, a shopping website that you could log into and you frequent a lot, say. But in terms of kind of organically discovering things and clicking through and that time to, I have a kind of a budget of time with which to capture a customer to spend time with me is important for some people. However, I've yet to, having watched this for a year or so, see concrete examples of where that happens. I can imagine the use case exists, but I still can't see those things. Maybe he just needs to wait or whatever. So again, I don't have strong opinions on those things, but I do have a strong one about using a frame to signal this. My experience so far has been clients don't want to wait for frames. If you make them, and you don't send one, most servers are not going to send that frame. So the client now needs to kind of make calls on how long it holds things for or not. And I don't know, it seemed pretty racy and pretty annoying to get right. Hence, I don't think it makes any sense to do it on its own without some of that TLS stuff. I'm not saying we should do the TLS stuff, but I don't think on its own it makes sense to do anything. We discussed this before with H2 server settings and other things too. So it seems part of that wider, again, a wider discussion of stuff. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Ted.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize I was going to appear to be such a shadowy figure. Sorry about that. I've been talking offline with folks about the GeoIP requirements, and obviously one of the potential mechanisms for delivering GeoIP is using client hints. And I think that colors my thinking about this very strongly. And I think it makes me align with what Martin was saying, because it's very clear that the use of GeoIP in many of these cases isn't really aligned all that strongly with something that the client needs. It's aligned with something that the server wants. And in this particular case, I think as we look at this from an architectural perspective, that makes me believe that the point at which you send a client hint is actually an architectural question about the relationship between the client and the server that's a good bit broader than just like how fast can this go. In particular, how does the client know what it's going to get for divulging this private information? And again, because I'm thinking of it in the GeoIP terms rather than other forms of client, it's very private information. And from my perspective, that means that moving it earlier, especially moving it into a TLS part of the exchange, as opposed to something later, is quite worrying because that client hint is in fact very identifying, and we don't necessarily want to move that into a different layer of the exchange. We want to have it be part of the context of the web as opposed to the context of the security relationship. So I think this needs a good bit of thought before this progresses. And I would really suggest that maybe we reach out to the TAG or other folks who are considering the architecture of the web and have a broader conversation rather than a smaller one on this topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Ted. Yoav.
Hey, so I'm somewhat biased here as I was involved in client hints in the past, but also involved with the picture element and source set. And essentially, to respond to Martin's comments, I don't think those are either or. Some servers need to do server-side adaptation for images for deployment reasons, while others can use the picture element, and that is fine. Similarly, when we're talking about HTML content, which this proposal in particular cares about, some servers choose to adapt their content in order to send less over the very first, to be able to get that initial HTML as soon as possible and as much of it as possible to the client. And I think that is like, there are legit deployment reasons for it. One such reason that I can think of that is no longer valid because I fixed it, but import maps used to have, like, you had a single shot at getting the right import map to the client, and that needed to happen. Like, essentially, it was a blocking asset. So you wanted it to be as small as possible and as adapted to the client, like to the modules that the client will actually need as possible. That is no longer the case. That is fixed, but there are other reasons why you want your HTML to be as adapted as possible. And I can similarly see a mechanism that is like it. I can similarly see that kind of mechanism also used for language negotiations, which are currently pretty bad and can be significantly improved. Yeah, so basically there are legit real life reasons to why you want to adapt your HTML. That's, I guess, the gist.
All right, thank you. I got in queue purely as an individual here. I think a lot of the questions Martin was bringing up are interesting and good to address. I think what would help is to be very concrete in the use case that we're trying to unlock here and the specific client hints that we think a particular server can benefit from and how that will benefit the user and benefit the client. And being able to frame it like that will help us and help this group and more broadly the architecture understand what are the trade-offs for privacy, for performance, etc. When it's fully in the abstract, we can project different use cases for different servers and different client hints, and it's quite broad. And I think this has been kind of the case with client hints from the beginning to a bit, to a degree. So being able to have that broader conversation, if there's stuff that goes on W3C, that's great. But also, if we're discussing this more in this group, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the drafts, but in some of the discussion on lists or in presentations, being very concrete about those use cases, I think would help motivate and engage the group engage with the discussion.
Okay.
Will.
I have a number of issues with this. So there's more data that the browser has to send, firstly, with the CH headers that get always sent with every request. That makes the initial payload bigger. The server can just request more data. So you can just send an accept CH header and request more data back. I haven't seen any mechanisms that allows the client to say whether they would want to send that back. So it doesn't really reduce privacy, increase privacy for me. It reduces it. Performance for the critical CH header. So obviously having to make another request, that's not good. Servers as well, if they want to do content negotiation, they should use feature detection rather than device specific stuff. So I think the idea that, we should send specific data that's easier to pass to the server so that it can send different content. They shouldn't be doing that anyway. I don't understand the reasoning, particularly from a processing point of view, why they've frozen the OS version in the user agent header, because I think it's quite a useful piece of information for statistics. And the user agent header is still going to be useful, especially for robots and things like that. I actually think it would be better to have a specification that defined what the user agent header and how it should be structured instead, because in terms of passing user agent header, that can be difficult, but it's mostly because people don't structure them in a format that's unified. So if there was a specification for how it should be structured, that would be better in my view.
Yeah, I think regarding the first question related to I think maybe server actually request all the contains maybe, so it's just like saying that it can be require more information, I think. So currently we don't have any some limitation that server can not request all the contains, but we're still under development for potential some mechanism with related to implicit limits. So maybe in the future, just we wanted to enforce some infrastructure limit. If we think that server requests too many information, the server can has the power to just doing the corresponding actions based on that. I think currently the state that because we just freeze the user agent related to, as you're talking about the user agent reduction, right? we're trying to make sure the goal that I'm lying about the entropy limits. We just needed to better controlling what kind of information that will require in the user agent setups.
On the user agent freezing part, I agree with reducing the amount of information in it. Like, you don't need to know the version, minor version numbers of your browser or your OS or whatever. But the major version stays. So I don't understand why the OS version would be frozen, again, when you could just send the major version.
For the major version, that I think just like we have done some study that should be has maybe considered like less entropy. But for the full version, I think it can carry much of, for example, maybe on a small amount of person just using that version can easily to identify combining other information. So that's why we're trying to limit the full versions on that actually. So I think we have a full XM explainer for that actually. I think this is kind of a response I think for the full version and stuff.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And we are up on time. Okay. So yeah, thank you very much for presenting. We can continue discussion on list, and it'd be great if you have further updates on the use cases and other conversations you have that you could share with the group.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Have a good rest of your meeting. One session left, and safe travels, everyone. We will see you on the list, and we will see you in Madrid.
As long as you're not going through Heathrow. As long as you're not going through Heathrow, it's on fire.
Is it? Oh, I missed it.
But will they have fixed all of the backlogs?
Is it in first yet?